Okay, call the Planning Commission meeting for April 5th to order. Scott, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please stand up. Right hand over your heart. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so do we have any public comment tonight on?
Would you like me to take the roll call?
Sure, yes.
Scott Gold,
I'm here.
Joanne Jamieson,
Yes.
Aaron Peterson,
Here.
Justin Rodriguez,
Present.
and Jack Williams.
Here,
Yep.
now we can move on to public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have anybody who would like to address the commission?
Would anybody on Zoom like to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Please raise your hand or unmute yourself. For phone, it's *6 to unmute. Seeing no public comment.
Okay, any requests for continuance, withdrawals, or additions to the agenda items? Seeing none, moving on. Conflicts and/or ex parte communications. Anybody have anything they wish to report? No. Good. Approval of the minutes from our last meeting, March 1.
Before we do that, can I ask a quick question about the minutes from the last meeting?
Sure, yeah.
On page 6, under discussion items, last meeting, Commissioner Peterson had a question about inventory of public parking spaces. And then City Manager Bradford stated that there was no parking inventory, but there was a completed parking study for parking, for public parking and opportunity zones. So I guess my question is, does that, I was confused about, does that exist, or is that something that we're working on, the actual inventory of spots?
We have a parking study which just studied public parking availability. So we have that
So we do have an inventory.
of public inventory, so city-owned parking available for public parking. We don't have full inventory as in one system to where you could easily pull it up of private parking spots or business parking.
Understood. So we don't have the total, we have the public parking spots that belong to the city.
Correct.
Thank you.
So that's on-street parking, parking lots?
Correct.
Okay.
And they actually also looked at some of the larger private lots that could have been potential for public-private partnership to create additional.
Like the
public-
one over by the post office?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you, sir. That said, if nobody else has any questions, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of March 1st, 2021, as presented.
I'll second.
Made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay, Lori, are you going to give general plan update, or are you going to do it?
Next
Tina?
item is going to be our consultants for the general plan update. They're here with us online, Zoom. They have been doing this type of presentation ever since we had our first workshop in February, introducing the general plan. So we've been connecting with different groups, Rotaries, et cetera, making this type of presentation continue to inform everybody about the process of the general plan, what it is, and how it is different this time being the comprehensive financial plan. So with that, we'll first hear a presentation from our consultant, give you the ability to ask any questions of them that you might have. And then the next item would be for us to talk about Jpac. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim and Brent online, who will be sharing a presentation with us.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Zenia. Let me pull up the presentation and Jim will get started and I'll pick it up.
Sure. My name is Jim Harnish. I'm the principal and owner of Venture Harnish.
And the project director for this project, Brent Gibbons, is our project manager. Also with us, but not on video, is Jordan Cowell, who's one of the project planners. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to Brent, who's going to make a presentation to you about the general plan. And we'd be happy to answer questions afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Well, good evening, commissioners. It's good to talk with all of you. I think we've gone through the council and the DRC and the Rotary and a few community workshops so far. So it's glad to speak with all of you tonight. So if you've seen this presentation, you should be an expert on this topic by now, but I'm going to move forward through this anyway. So we're here starting the general plan for the city of Solvang. And if you're not familiar with a general plan is required for every state, is required for every jurisdiction within the state of California, every city and county. A general plan is a comprehensive look at a number of elements that are required by state law. And the general plan in itself is general. It represents the community's vision for the future. Solvang has not completed a comprehensive general plan update since the city's incorporation. Over the years, the city has updated certain elements, housing element through its cycles, the mobility element and land use back in the early 2000s, and the community design element has not been updated since 1988. So a general plan in itself is general. It's comprehensive. These documents typically look out 20 to 25 years. The general plan that we're working with the city of Solvang on is looking out 20 years, so out to the year 2040. I think the greatest representation of a general plan is actually the pyramid that's shown here on the screen. If you think about it, the general plan is the foundation for all planning and all decisions related to land use. From there, you have your zoning, your subdivision maps, and then your building permits. All of those are implementation methods of the general plan. So your general plan lays your basic policy and goal guidance, and then your zoning, your subdivision, and building permits implement those. So those factors include all of your development regulations that are formed off of your general plan policy. What's important to note here too is that as part of this general plan, the goals and policies and your overall vision statement will help guide future decisions made by not only yourselves as a planning commission, but also the city council. So as part of a general plan, we look at a set of well-defined boundaries. So the dotted line here, that should be familiar to all of you. That is your city limits. Then the blue line is your sphere of influence, which is determined by LAFCO. And as part of a general plan update, we combine these two to create a planning area. And the importance of a planning area is to realize that, yes, your general plan is focused on the city, but there are outside factors which affect your community, and your community also affects areas outside the city. So it's important to look beyond your city limits and look into your sphere. Since Solvang is part of the greater Santa Ynez Valley, we will look regionally toward Santa Ynez and toward Buellton for other economic factors and other land use decisions that might affect the community, especially since Solvang is divided by Highway 246. There's a lot of implications that are outside of the city's control. So why update the general plan? Well, I had mentioned that this hasn't been updated comprehensively. It's been updated piecemeal over the years, but it's been over 33 years. There are several refinements that need to be made. One, this allows the community to take an opportunity to update its vision for the next 20 years, update the goals, policies, and overall citywide priorities. There's been a number of changes in state law. The general plan guidelines have been updated since the incorporation, so we want to make sure that we're consistent there. And as part of this effort, the city wanted to make sure that we foster sustainable economic development, look at diverse opportunities to expand economic development beyond tourism. So this is an opportunity to take that step. Also, what's important is to have participatory community engagement. I always like to say that we come in as technical experts, but it's not our plan, it's your plan. So I'm not here to impose my ideas. So we want to make sure that all the community has their voice heard through this process. And that's why we have a robust community engagement program outlined for the remainder of the general plan update. So I touched on the general plan guidelines. If you're familiar with the general plan process, the state mandates a series of elements, which are shown here on the screen. The newest being environmental justice. That needs to be incorporated within every general plan. So we'll touch on all of these and make sure that all of these topics are within your general plan. They might not have their own element per se, but the state allows you to combine these and condense them as you see fit. All topics just need to be covered. So I'll walk through the update process. We started the process back in December of last year with project initiation. We held a kickoff meeting with city staff and a walking tour. And then on February 6th, we held an all hands joint study session where we were able to introduce the project. We had about 50 community members join on Zoom, had a very robust discussion on issues and opportunities, and this laid the groundwork for the project moving forward. Currently, we're in the existing conditions and trends phase. And as part of this, we study and analyze the city and pull all the data. And we use this as the foundation for moving forward, not only for your alternatives process, which I'll discuss in a minute, but this is also the time to set the regional setting for your EIR down the road. Having all this information ahead of time allows us to formulate goals and policies and to make sure that we accurately reflect the community moving forward. The biggest pieces out of this phase, one is the existing conditions and trends workbook. And the existing conditions and trends workbook basically looks at solving in 2020, 2021. It takes a snapshot of the community, everything from economic development, land use, mobility, environment, and safety factors. And we report out what's on the ground today. As part of that, we then have a community workshop number 2, which is actually this Thursday and Friday. We have our first workshop on Thursday evening at 5 p.m. Participants can attend either via Zoom or in person. There's a registration link on the Plan Solving website. And then there's a second workshop, which is identical, and that's Friday morning at 10 a.m. That workshop is going to walk through the existing conditions workbook and lay out what data we have researched, and it'll give a glimpse into the city of Solving from a technical aspect. As part of that workshop, we'll also touch on the vision and guiding principles, and this is where we're going to start the discussion of what will Solving be like over the next 20 years. And that vision sets the foundation for future goals and policies as part of your general plan. Phase 3 is alternatives. This is the part of the plan that garners the most public attention. When most people think of alternatives, they think, well, my property is designated residential. What if it changes to a different designation or so forth? So as part of the alternatives discussion, we'll talk about areas within the city that could potentially have land use changes and whether certain development standards need to be updated to reflect those changes. And then we'll also open this up to having a policy discussion that'll tee up the policy document, which is in phase 4. So phase 4 is the actual meat of the general plan process. This is your goals, your policies, and your implementation programs, which will feed into the preparation of an environmental impact report. And then finally, what we all hope for is a smooth adoption all the way through the rest of the plan. So I talked about community outreach. We created a branding logo for this project, and it's shown here where it says Plan Solving. It looks like a business card on the screen. What we like to do at the beginning of every project is to have a logo that is recognizable. So when the community sees this, they realize, oh, that's the general plan. So wherever you see this logo, that means it has to do with this effort. You will see this on newsletters. You will see this on the city website. There are business cards that Xenia can provide to hand out to other community members to generate interest. And that also links back to our project website, a series of e-blasts, a number of newsletters which go out to the community. They go out in utility billing, they're sent out on a constant contact, and they're posted on our project website. So talking about our project website, this will basically be the home of the project. So all of our noticing for upcoming meetings or when a deliverable is out for public review will be found here. There'll be a document library that's attached to this, a calendar that catalogs upcoming events, and so forth. So the Plan Solving, it's plansolving.com. That is the slogan for this update. So I would invite anybody to go to this website to learn more about the project process. When documents are ready for public review, they'll be posted here. As part of this website, there also is a commenting feature where any member of the public can send us a question. That question goes to myself, it goes to Jim Harnish. Xenia also gets a copy. So any time of day when a community member has a question about the process, they can send that to us. And that's also where the community members can sign up online. There's a sign up button. And when they sign up there, they'll get attached to a constant contact. So for example, the community workshops coming up, they would get notified probably 2 or 3 times before that workshop takes place. So I know that was a mouthful, but that is a general overview of where we are with the general plan update. Jim and myself are available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Can I just go ahead? All right. Where do parks and recreation come in, under conservation or open space?
Parks and Recreation will probably come in under the open space portion. What we typically like to do is combine. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. Contemporary element organization in general plans combines your parks, open space, and recreation into a single element. Anything pertaining to open space preservation of natural resources typically falls within a environment element.
Break that down for me again, okay? Because I see open space as part of our parklands, like Hans Christian Andersen Park. It's just a big rough area. It's not an organized park. Part of it is, but the majority of it is just walking.
True. So yeah, if we were doing to categorize that, that would fall in what would be known as like an open space parks and recreation element. When we're talking about the preservation of open space as like habitat, that would be typically found in an environment element.
I guess what I'm saying, we do need to save the environment that's in that park. It's pretty unique. So I think there's a crossover there.
Yes, and it's not uncommon to have several topics, to have a topic that is cross-cutting, as you're bringing up. That would be in an environment element and in an open space and parks element. What we typically do to not have duplicative policies and goals is we will cross-reference different sections between elements. For example, what's one I'm trying to think of? Wildfire development. If you're trying to limit development in wildfire hazard areas, you might have a policy on that in your land use element when it comes to residential development. But in the safety element, you'll have a more robust set of policies regarding wildfire mitigation.
Okay, thank you.
We can cross-reference between them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ask your question. Ask.
Anybody else? Questions? Concerns?
Well, I'm going to ask then, because we were looking at environmental justice.
Yes.
What is it?
Environmental justice is an analysis that looks into disproportionate environmental effects on specific populations that are overburdened. So typically environmental justice, you will look at areas that are overburdened by pollution, areas that are overburdened by land uses that are considered sensitive. So the state actually has what's known as Cal EnviroScreen, and it's a state mapping program that identifies areas that meet certain income thresholds that are below the median average income for your area. That's broken down by census block. And what we do is we analyze that to determine if there are any undue burdens on those areas. Initial research into the city of Solvang does not have any environmental justice identified locations based on income thresholds.
So do we have to have that element then?
You don't necessarily have to have that element, but it's a topic that can be applied to areas regardless if they fall in that income threshold. I don't know if Jim Harnish would want to elaborate on this a little more for communities that don't have a designated area.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, I'll add just a little to it. This is a requirement for cities and counties who have as Brent referred to, these impacted neighborhoods or communities that tend to be communities of color, low-income communities of color. It doesn't apply to every city and county in California, and the virus screen 3.0 that Brent referred to is kind of a starting point for that. And it is, and the state, Cali PA, does this analysis. So that's our starting point. If these impacted communities aren't identified in Solvang, and I don't believe they are, then the city has a choice of not doing the element. So it's discretionary in that case. We've worked in other communities who do have some census tracts that are impacted, and they are obligated to address the issues. So in your case, it's optional.
Okay, thank you.
Who makes the decision on whether to keep it in or not?
Well, it's I would say it's kind of an evolving collective decision. We are working in communities who don't have specifically identified neighborhoods, but there are some issues of social equity, community health, that they feel like they should use this mechanism, the general plan, to consider those issues. So it's an evolving issue, and we'll bring these topics up. The first step is actually this week when we talk about the existing conditions and trends. So there'll be some data presented that describes the community circumstance. If there is a strong interest in pursuing this, even though your community may not rise to the pollution impact levels that other communities do, if you consider it an issue in the community, you meaning community groups, the planning commission, city council, if it's could be one of a number of issues that comes up that we can address as we kind of the plan process unfolds.
What kind of pollution impact are you talking about when you say pollution impact level?
Well, there are, I recall there are 18 different factors that the virus screen focuses on. The predominant ones are air pollution, TAC emissions, toxic air contaminants tend to be from diesel trucks. Water pollution is another major issue, both from just contaminated water. This project or residential areas near industrial areas, refineries, solid waste disposal sites tend to be more impacted. So it's air quality, water quality. There are a number of, and looking at these communities, income, education, language factors. So it's a range of both environmental effects, economic and social effects.
If I can make a comment, it seems like if down in the Nielsen Center, Buell Flat, if we put a low-income housing down there, close to the dust, close to the noise, if we put low-income housing right along the corridor of 246 with noise pollution and the cars that are going by, those kind of things, they have them in Santa Barbara all over, the corridor along 101. Communities tend to put their low income or moderate or super low income right along those awful corridors where nobody else wants to buy, and therefore you do an exchange and you put in a high density low income housing development there. And it's to protect those folks from doing that. As I think these gentlemen pointed out, we don't have that in town. The new development on 246 behind New Frontiers, they're gonna be, I don't know, $1 million a house or something. I mean, we don't have what a lot of the communities have. We certainly don't have any industrial parks where we're doing low-income housing and shoving it down into those areas. So it could be a non-issue here. It's not bad to address it and have it in there as an element that we make sure that we recognize and keep abreast of it for future. I mean, that's how I would look at it, but I don't think it won't take a lot of time and effort and energy, given that we're at build out and we just don't have a lot of those environmental impacts that a lot of cities have. That's kind of my background on it.
And there are some communities that don't have a disadvantaged community like Solvang. But a lot of these topics are cross-cutting. So in general, it's best to not place residential adjacent to heavy commercial or industrial uses. So some communities do incorporate environmental justice policies on a broad level.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of comments. First, the circumstances that you had just mentioned are, they apply to all of us. You don't want to put housing right next to a freeway where you have noise impacts or quality impacts. And you're exactly correct. There is a tendency for low-income communities to locate in areas that nobody else wants to live. So there's this kind of historic development patterns over time that have created this circumstance. But on the other point that you made that I want to reinforce is Solvang doesn't tend to have the kind of pollution sources that other communities do, heavy industry, freeways, lots of agriculture where you may generate major pesticide use. You have some of that in the wineries, but it's not nearly as predominant as it is, say, in the Central Valley and the Imperial Valley. So the LA Basin and the San Joaquin Valley are where these concentrations are greatest. And it's because of the industrial, agricultural, truck traffic uses. So that's at the base. That's why Solvang really isn't nearly as affected as many other places in the state are, because you don't have that heavy industry or the heavy agricultural use of pesticides.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Shall we move on?
I would just like to mention before we move on to the next meeting that there is the second community workshop scheduled for this Thursday at 5 p.m. and then another session for Friday at 10 a.m. We still have availability, so I would encourage everyone to sign up. These are in-person workshops primarily. There will be boards and workstations. They're all COVID-friendly, county-approved for us to hold. So we're hoping to get more people between now and Thursday and Friday to sign up and join us in person. There will be a Zoom option, but it will be a little bit more limited this time. We will have a quick presentation at the beginning, and then we'll tell basically people that you can participate on your own pace through the online resources to give feedback. But it will be less interactive via Zoom, and online it will be in person. So just encourage everybody to come, and Planning Commission is also welcome to be there as well.
I have one more question, Zine, on this topic. Is when is the general plan planned to be finalized, or when will these gentlemen foresee ending their work and handing over a finished product?
The entire process has been scheduled and is scheduled for approximately 2 years. So we kicked off in December, had the first workshop in January. This is the first more of a meaty collection of data workshop, so it's really important one for community to participate in, because consultants and staff will take that input from the community and then have the first product to review for example, for the Gpac that we'll be talking about next.
And one more question, will it be modified again? Because they said our current general plan over last 30 years has been modified piecemeal here and there. Is this like a living kind of document where you guys might change things as needs arise?
Well, it's recommended to do this kind of comprehensive update, and it's really looking forward for 20-25 years. So it's creating a vision, a long-term vision. Obviously, there may be circumstances where things are updated. The housing element has to be updated as laws change.
Right.
But this is the idea of, for the first time, looking at the general plan as a comprehensive document and really developing that path forward.
Okay. Thank you.
So it kind of resets a new baseline
Correct.
to move forward from.
Right.
And I have a question. When you said that there were sessions on Thursday and Friday, I thought there were 2 sessions on Thursday.
So because of fairly low sign-up, we have combined the 2 sessions on Friday, or on Thursday, excuse me, to just hold the 5 p.m.
Just 5 p.m., okay. I hadn't heard that.
Yes, we've updated the website, and we've informed a few people that were signed up for later to sign up for another session.
So, anything else? Shall we move on to the Gpac?
All right, so the next item is formation of the Gpac. This item went to City Council, and they conceptually agreed with proposed formation of a Gpac, which consists of 2 volunteers from Council, 2 volunteers from Plan Commission, and 2 volunteers from Design Review Committee, as well as 9 members from public at large. The application process for the public at large is currently open. Once again, we encourage people to submit their applications. The deadline is Friday of this week, the 9th at 5 p.m. There's 2 commissioners already that volunteered to be on the Gpac, and 2 design review committee members that have volunteered. And now we're looking at hopefully having 2 members of the Planning Commission volunteer as well. And this committee is thought of to be a non-Brown Act body, which is why we are asking for volunteers rather than you formally approving this. And the meetings are not set. It will be the bylaws or the agreement of how the committee will operate will be up to the committee once we form it and how often we meet. I would say that we would probably be meeting somewhere every 2 months or quarterly based on the overall schedule of the general plan. And the role of the Gpac is really to provide to the consultants who are the specialists that do this kind of work with many communities and who provide us with all the basic milestones and walk us through the process and provide us with expertise and then putting together the final product. The Gpac's role is to feed in the Solving's vision and make sure that we interpret what the community is asking us to look at and incorporate into the policies is being incorporated.
Okay, I think that's great. So I guess the question is would anybody like to volunteer for this?
I'd like to. I'd like to volunteer too.
Volunteer if other people really want it either.
No, we've got 2 right there. Anybody else?
I think Aaron, you should do it. Interested in doing it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would sure do it.
Okay, so it looks like Aaron and Joni.
Okay, we have Johnny James and Aaron Peterson. Thank you.
That was easy. Okay, let's move on to the public hearing items. You want to give us the staff report on this?
Thank you very much. My name is Lori Tamura, contract
If I
plan.
may, Lori, before you start, and Chair Williams, with your permission, if I may, I believe Commissioner Rodriguez might have a potential conflict of interest he needs to disclose before we get started on this matter.
Yes.
I will keep this
Commissioner Rodriguez, if before you leave, if you could just state for the record what the conflict is and what your financial interest is that's
I
related to this.
live in Skip Mesa. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start again. Lori Tamura with planning consultant for the city. And we also have Chelsea O'Sullivan, who's assistant city attorney with us tonight. We're bringing forward to you a discussion in regards to the Skip Mesa project. This project was approved in 2003, and over that period of time, the project had a number of phases recorded. And what we found is through the conditions of approval, we have some issues with the project, mainly because there was no homeowners association required for this development. it leaves us with a situation where there's a number of things in the conditions of approval, the CCNRs, the design guidelines, and even the city's zoning ordinance that influence how things are done at Skip Mesa. The critical issues that we've been dealing with primarily focus on accessory structures, recreational vehicles, and other towing vehicles or trailers or whatever, front yard landscaping, side yard landscaping, and fence changes, painting and architectural material changes. And then we've added accessory dwelling units because I think it's important to educate Skip Mesa that accessory dwelling units are going to be an important factor as they live within their community. Normally, a homeowners association would be responsible for most of these items. What we're bringing for you today is a review of the items that we just listed and talk about how we can move forward with working with the homeowners. And normally, we would recommend that we would treat this subdivision the same as we treat all other subdivisions, where we focus on complaint-based concerns that are brought before us. We address health and safety issues, and we deal with those things that involve city-maintained space, like the streets, the sidewalks, the curbs, gutters, landscaping that's within the public domain. So the presentation is my, go ahead. So what I'm going to, I would recommend today that I would go through the presentation, and pictures are worth 1,000 words, so I'll go through this relatively quickly. There was a lot of material provided in the staff report and the attached documents, including the original conditions of approval. The two CCNRs that were recorded, one for Skip Mesa and the other for Vista at Skip Mesa. And that was discern the two different developers that were involved in this project. Curtis Homes did the first phase, the recession hit, sat for a while, and then Coastal Community Builders picked up the other three phases and called their subdivision then Vistas at Skip Mesa. And then, of course, the design manual was adopted by Curtis Homes, and it was basically used throughout the whole subdivision. They didn't make any changes to the design manual. Next slide. The issues that we're going to review tonight are accessory structures and sheds, recreational vehicles, front yard landscaping, side yards, change in colors and materials, and accessory dwelling units. Next one. Accessory structures, based on the zoning ordinance, first of all, it is in the CCNRs that you can have accessory structures, and it's also in the design manual. But the issue is the zoning ordinance is much more specific, and it talks about the requirements for having them in your rear yard, can't cover more than 40%, and can't be more than 12 feet high. On corner lots, you need to meet the existing setback of the existing home. But there is an exemption for sheds that are less than 120 square feet and less than 12 feet high. In those cases, they don't need a permit, and all the other ones would need a permit if they're larger than that. That would be a land use permit, and also building department would be looking at the structural design of the shed or accessory structure. So if you can go to the next slide.
Just a quick question on that. You said it says on the exemptions is 120 feet and 12 feet high. Is it really and?
Yes.
In other words, could you have 120 or 120 feet and 16 foot high, or could you have?
It's and.
It's and, okay.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
If we can go to the next slide, these are just some examples of sheds that are questionable that we would have to, that are existing at Skip Mesa. The one at the left-hand side has 4 sheds right up against their side yard, and they're probably each meets the requirement of less than 120 square feet and 12 feet high, but there's 4 of them now instead of what you would expect to be 1. But there's no provision in the ordinance that says 1 or 4 or 6 or whatever. The one on the right is a shed that's in the side yard setback, and it is estimated to be about 16 feet high. Next one. Here's an example of a corner lot where the shed is closer to the street than the house itself. It's in the side yard setback and is not consistent with the ordinance. So that's, I'll just stay there. So what we're recommending in this particular case is that we acknowledge that these situations are not consistent with the zoning ordinance, and we would pursue citing the homeowners to move their sheds outside of the side yard setbacks, most likely in the rear yard, or remove them. So that'll be our first recommendation. And I'll just keep going, and then we'll go through the rest of this. Go ahead. The next item is RVs, and the ordinance requires that RVs be stored behind a fence. And so we have situations where you can see there's a number of homes that have RVs. Ironically, the CCNRs say that they can't be more than 8 feet tall or 8 feet high. So it really limits you to a much smaller RV, maybe even one that collapses. But we don't enforce, the city doesn't enforce CCNRs. So the zoning ordinance doesn't give a height restriction, they require them be stored behind a fence. So here's an example of one that probably is just about 8 feet high. The other one maybe a little bit more, but they're using a blue tarp to shield it from the sun. The next slide will show one that is substantially higher, 12 feet high. And you can also see what they've done here is taken out their landscaping. They rolled the RV over the curb into the backyard and over the sidewalk and the landscaping. The next slide. We have a number of homeowners that are storing things in their front yard, boats, RVs, trailers, and this is not permitted by the city's zoning ordinance, and so we would be going out and citing them. So one of the things that we're just bringing forward to you today is how people are adapting to living in Skip Mesa. These are large lots, and they have big side yard setbacks, so people are taking advantage of them. I think the next slide. So you have the situation where people, this is actually, I believe, the same one that you saw earlier, but they just pulled their RV out, so they really had made a mess of this street in the side edge of the sidewalk as well as the curb. You have in the example in the other one where you can just see the tracks in the landscaping where somebody had pulled out from their side yard. So what we're recommending is that we cite those vehicles that are parked in the front, encourage and require that they put their RVs in the back. If they damage the landscaping, the sidewalk, the curbs, or the roads, that will be taken care of through the city citing them for replacement and fixing what they've damaged. So that.
May I ask a question about that? Are you going to allow them to put in a driveway to get to their mobile homes back there? Like in,
They would
The
have
one on
to
the right?
first approach the Public Works Department for an encroachment permit, because they'll be, installing this driveway across public right-of-way. We have not even considered that yet.
Okay.
Whether they would do something where they could put brickwork in there or some other kind of more subtle DG or something that would look better than just
cinder
a new
blocks that
driveway.
are planted?
Yeah,
Okay.
Could I add to that?
Sure.
Sorry. Good evening, Chair Williams and Planning Commissioners. Matt Vanderlinden, your Public Works Director and City Engineer. So generally, we do not allow multiple driveways on properties. And the reason for that is it creates an added conflict point for accidents with pedestrians, bicyclists, and other vehicles. So in general, we don't allow that. That's our general practice, at least since I've been here. And every other, well, there's a few properties that you'll drive around the city, you'll see that have two driveway approaches. Some of them have like circular driveways that pull in and out, but we have very few of those. And so most people that have RVs, their parking, their property is situated where they pull in their regular driveway that leads to their garage, and they have some expanded area, or they have a wide side yard, and they, from their driveway, their one driveway approach, create a space for the RV back on the lot, next to the home or whatever. So this would be like completely different from anything we've ever allowed in the city, so. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
If we can go to the next one. So this aerial photograph of Skip Mesa gives you an idea of how the project has developed over time. You can see the newer streets from the last phase. But what's important here, and it's going to cover the next topic, is there are a number of lots that have, corner lots that have a decorative side yard. And this was established through the original development of the project, where you would have your parkway, your sidewalk, and then you'd have up to 8 to 10 feet of decorative landscaping that would be on the person's property, but it was part of the landscaping plan. So I will show you next some of the illustrations here. Skip Mesa, when it was first done, the first phase, all of the green belts were grass, and then on the back side, they had the sidewalk, and then there would be some decorative, maybe drought tolerant landscaping. But you can see that it's basically a parkway on both sides. The picture on the right, which has the grass and the tree, is the demarcation line between the first phase and the second phase, where now you see more water drought tolerant landscaping and more of ground covered bark or some other material, and you don't have a lot of grass to maintain. If you can do the next one. Here's another example of a corridor situation. Ironically, it's also the one that has the shed. But you can see that in the future vista at Skip Mesa project, there was drought tolerant landscape on both sides of the sidewalk, but you had a good 10 feet on each side to make it a nice pedestrian sidewalk condition. And this is also the area that is maintained by the landscaping district that was set up at Skip Mesa, which includes, hiring the landscaper, dealing with the irrigation, landscaping, and maintaining all of the materials within these greenbelt strips. Again, the property line is actually at the back of the sidewalk, but there's this 10-foot easement that's for the landscaping district on these corner lots. If you can go to the next slide. We have a couple of conditions that have evolved where the fence has been moved to take away some of that greenbelt area. And the situation is that we're getting more requests to move these fences to allow for that property line to be inside the fence. On this particular one on the left, you can actually see way over on the side, there's a swimming pool on the other side of the fence. So if we can go to the next one. This is a situation where a fence has been moved to the sidewalk, and it actually involved a combination of retaining wall and fence. And then you have landscaping on the side. That situation is that person's property, but they've eliminated the 10 feet of landscaping that was originally installed throughout the neighborhood.
Sorry, so just to be clear, on the photo on the left, the owner has taken the fence and moved it towards
the sidewalk.
The sidewalk, giving them more space in their yard.
Correct, and it's more spaces to park the RV and put another shed there. So this particular situation has almost all of the conditions that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's see, next slide. Okay, sorry, if you can go back. So our recommendation in this particular situation is that, and talking with the Public Works Director, is we're recommending that no further action be taken to move the fence outside of the areas that were originally installed by the developer. And so that we won't exacerbate this condition that's been occurring, on a case-by-case basis. If we can go to the next slide. The other situation with landscaping is we've had some complaints because people are putting in artificial turf, which actually is encouraged by the city because it reduces water use. And so we want to make sure the community knows we're not going to enforce the original landscaping that was installed by the developer. If someone wants to transition their green space to either artificial turf or more drought-tolerant landscaping, they can work with the city if they need to, or they can go ahead and do that themselves. Again, this is just one of the other comments that we've had from the community. Next slide. This is probably the most challenging issue, is changes in colors and materials. There is the design guidelines and CC&Rs, and then there's also action taken by the Board of Architectural Review on the palettes and combination of colors that could be used by each one of the different architectural styles. So here you have French country and the different combination of colors and materials. We'll just flip through these. Here's California Ranch, kind of a darker brown as their base color, lighter beige, and then you kind of have a grayish color. Go ahead. Different combinations for early California style, and then the last one. And these materials here. What's happening is that the first phase of Skip Mesa is about 10 years old now, and those homes are coming forward to repaint. We haven't had any requests to repaint homes since the one case that we're going to just illustrate here tonight. If you can go to the next one. So here's examples of some of the homes that have been painted in the last couple of years. Staff had established a methodology for reviewing the changes in paint colors and materials, and it would be approved at a staff level. So we have documentation of that process in the files. This is the only neighborhood in the city of Sylvain that reviews the paint at a staff level rather than through the homeowners association. And the next one. This particular house is half painted. Originally, it was a beige on and blue half timber colors, and they started painting their house this blue base with white trim, and we received a number of complaints on it. And so this was really the first indication that we had where there's been an established procedure from city staff in reviewing colors and trying to make a determination that they're consistent with the original color palettes that were identified in the approval by BIR back in 2016. So at this point, we asked the homeowner to stop painting his house because this was an issue that we were going to have to deal with separately, but it's an example of putting the staff in a position of reviewing every single house over the coming years on the colors and the choices that they're going to make to paint, rather than having an HOA that they could work with and within their community. Lastly, we have not yet received a request for an ADU on any of the properties in Skip Mesa, but it is state law, and just as we have these other issues that the neighbors are concerned about living with their neighbors, accessory dwelling units are the law of the land, and they are ministerial, and there is no discretion by staff, and this particular state law that allows for accessory dwelling units explicitly says that CCNRs that exclude accessory dwelling units or any accessory dwelling are overridden by state law. So we will probably see in the foreseeable future applications for accessory dwelling units, either as a junior ADU, which is attached, or a remodel of the existing single-family home. And in this example, they're showing a conversion of the garage, or a structure in the back that could be up to 1,200 square feet. The important thing to note here is if they do convert the garage, you do not have to replace that parking for the garage. So it would be parking in the driveway or on the street. And you can have 3 units on the property. You can have the junior ADU, the main house, and the accessory dwelling unit. So this is no action here today, but I thought it was appropriate to make this statement because this will probably be coming up in the near future with other applications. So if we can go to the next slide. So the recommendations, we kind of went through this quickly, but a lot of material was provided. Accessory dwelling units, we recommend that the planning commissions refer to the city council these following recommendations. Enforce the zoning code for the accessory structures and shed. Contact those that have sheds in their side yards to have them relocate to the backyard or remove them. For RVs and other storage vehicles, have any items that are parked in the front be cited. Encourage them to remove them or place them in their rear yards. RVs that are higher than 12 feet or 8 feet are not zoning violations, but they can be pursued by the neighbors. If they don't like them, the CCNRs do allow them to enforce their CCNRs. Any damage to landscaping, curbs, or sidewalk will be the responsibility of the homeowner to repair, and will be handled either through the landscaping district or by Public Works. The landscaping changes that were referred to with the artificial turf, that is not a violation and is allowed, and no further action would be taken by anyone complaining about changes to some front yard. Corner, side yards, and fencing, we're recommending that no further changes occur in the side yards of those corner lots that have the green belts on both sides of the sidewalks, that the fence basically stay in its current location. In regards to colors and material changes, there were 3 recommendations in the staff report, and one of them was that the county or the city staff no longer police painting or changes in materials, that it's now a homeowner's responsibility. So we would discontinue the city's review of repainting or changing materials in the Skip Mesa project. This process is consistent with the treatment of other neighborhoods, but it would be inconsistent with the CCNRs and the design manual provisions. And we would avoid recommending that that be changed by the Planning Commission and the City Council. The other option is to continue staff review of the color changes when requested by a homeowner, but not respond to complaints or other engagement with enforcement activities in respect to house colors. It's one that we can review and work with them, but if somebody wants to change their colors, the city's not going to step in on that. Finally, the last option is we become the BAR or the DRC of Skip Mesa, and every change has to be approved by city staff or referred to the DRC. That would be a very much more extensive process than any other neighborhood, and we would have to set up a process for that as well as a fee for staff to process those kind of applications. And then, of course, the last item was ADUs and junior ADUs are permitted and contrary to what the CCNR say. So we're here tonight to bring these items for you. It has been somewhat a struggle with staff to pursue all of these items, and we need some direction on how to treat Skip Mesa without an HOA. Staff is having to step in on that, and we need some direction to how much time is spent dealing with Skip Mesa neighborhood issues. So I'm available for any questions, and Matt Vanderlinden is here from Public Works, and we're here to help.
I do. I have two questions, actually. I'm sorry, would you go back to the screen? I guess as an overall global question, for fences that have been moved, are we asking them to, are we saying that it's okay to keep them in their current state, or are we asking them to move them back? Any work that's been done, does it stay or does it go back?
It appears that those fences were moved with permission.
And so?
So we can't ask them to move them back.
Okay, so they say. And sorry if I miss this, what would it take to create an HOA for Skeet Mesa? Is that an impossibility, or could one be created and that would be that? Why can we not create an HOA for Skeet Mesa?
The HOA, and we do have attorney here.
Sure.
An HOA would have to be formed by the landowners, and you'd have to have, I'm assuming, a supermajority to have an HOA established. You're also looking at a fee. There will be some kind of administrative cost, insurance, annual reportings. There's a number of steps that happen with establishing an HOA, and that's why it's usually established before there are
Sure.
homeowners.
So then the cost would be assumed when you purchase the land.
Correct.
But it seems to me, and I could be wrong, that has there been a survey to ask the homeowners if they would be interested in creating an HOA?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll follow up on that. Would it make sense to do that?
We can do some initial research and pose that question to, can we just, so we could do some initial research and pose the question. The group now has a kind of a lead person that has established a Facebook group, so there is a fairly easy way of communicating with that, as at least those who are signed up. So we can do some initial probing into that question and see what we receive as a response.
Certainly, it's a beautiful area, and a lot of people and a lot of homeowners, and I don't want to speak for them, take it very personally and can identify what is and what is not correct with the CCR. So I would guess, and again, no, but I'd love to see those results for the people who may be interested in forming an HOA. So a lot of these things could be handled through that.
Right, the way every other community
So
does.
we wouldn't have to get the city involved. You wouldn't need to do your thing. A lot of questions that would normally come over the table wouldn't have to be answered. They would be in the book, and the HOA would be able to handle it themselves.
Right, and I think from overall just resourcing perspective for the city and for any further recommendations going forward, the city is obviously experiencing a lot of financial difficulties. We have a lot of needs. So really putting a lot of money into staff and enforcement for just one neighborhood versus the entire city is problematic. So an HOA would definitely resolve it for this neighborhood if they wanted to have that level of enforcement.
Sounds like there's a lot of benefits.
Matt? you
Yeah,
have
excuse
something?
me, if I could just make a suggestion. So, over the last several years, overseeing the Skip Mesa or Solvang Mesa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District, there have been many residents that have asked that same question, why don't we just form a homeowners association? We've heard some, I think the majority of them probably do want that. There's a few that we've heard from that don't want it. But before we do a survey, I would suggest that we get a legal opinion, because my understanding from our past city attorneys, there's a certain threshold that has to be met to actually create one. And you could have a problem if you had, like, let's say 70% of the residents, agree to form it, but the other 30% or whatever percent don't want to be in it. And now, how does the one group force the other to pay or comply with the whatever requirements of the HOA? So I'd recommend getting a clear legal determination before because I wouldn't want to give people false hope that we could create some homeowners association, not understanding the steps that would be required to actually make it happen. So understand that first, then do a survey. The staff could easily implement a survey, but I think we should get something in writing. Here's the steps that would have to happen, and understand that before we go further. Because my understanding there's several hurdles that might not be possible.
Chelsea, do you have any initial opinion on this?
I would have to look into that further, but I think, it's generally possible, but getting the details about what exactly, what the thresholds are, I would have to do some additional research for that. But I'm happy to do that at the Planning Commission's direction.
We'd appreciate it very much.
Will do.
Could I make a comment, please?
Well,
I'm
we
the
were
home-
just
Excuse
going to move on to public comment, so, yes,
Is that okay?
state your name and
My name is Gary Johnson. I'm age 85 years old. I live at Skip Mesa, and I'm the homeowner of the house in question with the color change. Now,
staff painted.
I have presented the letter of my status to you. I would hope that you have a copy of that letter.
It was included in the package for the
It
Planning
was
Commission.
included in the package.
But we don't have names. They were,
Well, I could read that letter, or I could just state my case, whichever you would do. But I moved into the house, and I was given some very large documents as to how to treat that house with all of the various systems within it. There's nothing in there that even refers to color changes when you want to repaint your house. And I've gone over that document in detail. There was never any reference to anything like that. Now, my situation is I started to paint that house in February, the first part of February, and I was told to stop painting it in the middle of February, and so it's still sitting there, half painted. I've given the painter $10,500 so far toward a $16,000 bid. And so I'm already into this thing 60% painted. And I just don't understand how I'd have to maybe start all over again with the approved colors, particularly when there was other houses that were shown on the slides that were already painted outside of the color codes. And so I would feel like I probably have some precedent of being able to continue to finish painting my house rather than have to start all over again, because we've got 30 gallons of paint in buckets outside on the side of the house still yet to be used. And if I have to start all over again, it's going to be extremely expensive and very difficult. And it's going to, I would just hope that I could be grandfathered in somehow, because there are other houses, and I think those exceptions were shown on the screen. One house was painted lavender, one was painted very dark gray with black shutters. One was painted stark white with black shutters. Those are all outside the color codes. And we did a lot of research on our particular house. And everybody that I've talked to and gotten comments from have thought it was a breath of fresh air. They thought it looked more like Danish color combinations than anything that's in there. And so I'm in a situation where I'm really between a rock and a hard place. And I've been waiting now almost 2 months for a decision. And Lori Tamura, when I initially met with her, she wrote me a letter and approved the project. She said I could go ahead. And you should have a copy of that letter. If you don't, I have one here. But she gave me the approval to go ahead and continue to finish the project. She says, right here, she says, "Thank you for your patience on the matter regarding your home. As you know, the city of Solvang received a complaint that the house was being painted and they were concerned about the color. Based on the information provided by you and your contractor, the final color of the home is a dark blue with a white trim. We've determined that although this color combination is different than other homes in the neighborhood, it does follow the provisions of the design guidelines, particularly page 2-2. Colors and materials should relate to and complement the natural environment and the unique Solvang character. Diversity and compatibility is the goal. This color combination is allowed per the design guidelines. Let me know if you have any questions on this matter. Lori Tamura." So I got the approval. I went back to the painter. We scheduled a new time to get started. And then 2 days later, I was informed that the neighbors that complained weren't going to accept that decision. And they were going to present it to this body here. And so I really, I really want to be a good neighbor. I was the very first one to move up there. I've been up there 14 years last Labor Day. And it was time to paint the house. Now it's time to paint almost all those houses that are in that first phase. And so my plea to you is to reconsider, or at least to allow me an exception to continue to finish the paint job. And I would be so grateful if you'd let me do that. I'm getting along in years. I don't have that many more years to go. And I just would plead with you to reconsider, at least in my case, and allow me to go ahead and finish that paint job. So do you have any questions?
Any questions?
Just a question. What he's saying is correct. Letter went out and approved, and then it got rescinded? Is that what happened?
Yes, and this is an example of not understanding history on what had transpired at Skip Mesa, and when further discussion with the neighborhood, explanation about how previous painting proposals had gone through a staff review and went through an actual change of use process or change in color process, and then referred to several sections, not only of the design guidelines, but those actions that were taken in 2016 with that final colors palette that I presented here tonight. We instructed Mr. Johnson to stop painting his house, that we need to look at other ways of evaluating his project. And so I suggested that he wait till tonight so he can hear the discussion here, not specifically on his house, but the direction that is going to be taken to forward onto the city council, and look at other, how this process is going to move forward. He happened to be the lightning rod for this discussion on colors because the neighborhood did have grave concerns about the choices that he made.
And if I could just clarify, Commissioners and Chair Williams, at this point, this particular house is not before you. Deciding whether the color is appropriate is not before you. It's just a very good example of the issues that have been presented in the neighborhood at large. So just keeping that in mind going forward with your recommendations to the city council can be about how to handle the color issues more generally, but at this point, deciding whether the color of this house is appropriate is not, it was not on the agenda and is not before you as a decision tonight.
Can I, go ahead.
I'm just going to thank her. Go ahead.
So on that note, if we're not going to make the decision, how long does this gentleman need to wait to make a decision or to move forward or to get reimbursed or whatever that looks like? How long does he have to wait? What steps do we have to take for him to have some closure here?
What we're looking for is the city council, your direction, and then city council's direction on how we handle these changes. So we're looking at this going to the city council in the end of May? I mean,
We could
We
have
can-
this item, I think that if we receive fairly strong direction from planning commission, in this case, I would feel comfortable moving forward with a resolution on this case before further seeking direction from city
And we'll
council.
discuss the big picture when we bring it back to the
Okay.
commission. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you for your consideration. I would sure appreciate it if you'd give it some serious thought.
So there were a couple of other letters that we got. Do we need to literally read those in, or can we just?
So I think we,
Accept
we have not been practicing reading public comment that comes by email or mail into public during the meetings, just because there can be so many of them that it would be a very long meeting. But I think there is more public comment here.
But I just wanted to cover that, so we can just acknowledge that we got these letters,
Correct.
and they will be part of the
Record.
decision-making process. Thank you.
Yes, hello. I'm a resident of Solvang. I saw the slide and it said Skeet Mesa improvements, and then you went into a long thing about environmental impact reports and so on, and then Ms. Rodriguez left. And I'm not sure what that was. And now you seem to be in the subject. What was the initial question? What were you talking about easements and so on? It didn't seem resolved, and why did he storm out the room?
Go ahead.
Justin Rodriguez has recused himself because he lives in Skeet Mesa, and to avoid conflict of interest, he has recused
But you
himself.
could still sit here.
No,
No, you can sit, you don't have to rule, you can still sit in the audience.
no.
No,
You can't know what's going on? Are
he
you,
can go home and listen to it on.
no, but you can listen, even if you're recused.
Okay,
Of course
so-
you can.
It's a Brown Act violation. It's a legal law in the state of California that if somebody sits on here and sits in the audience and stares at us and nods his head, that maybe he's influencing us. So we must leave the room. He can certainly listen outside. I've done it many times. You can go home and listen, but he can't make comments unless it directly affects his particular property. So it's not up to us. The city attorney would explain it probably better than I could, but that's what he had to do.
Okay, I understand. So at this last half of the conversation made sense. So what was the initial issue? What was the environmental impact reports and the easements and so on? Why did that seem so unclear? It seems like later on you've got it straight, but what was that issue?
We were talking about the general plan update, and when we changed from that item to the next item, which was Skeet Mesa, Justin missed that we had made that change. So somebody reminded him that he
City attorney
probably should
reminded him.
recuse himself. So there was some confusion on his part. In fact, I don't know if you heard him when he left, he said, I didn't realize that we had moved on to that.
And so,
But to be clear, the very first item we talked about, which was a general plan update, had nothing to do specifically with Skeet Mesa. It has something to do generally with the entire town, but not specifically item number 2, which is what we're dealing with.
But the only real areas in the town right now, as far as easements.
Oh, no,
relative-
it's all
you
over.
mentioned Hans Christian Andersen Park. One person mentioned that it was a rural area. It's a fully developed park with playgrounds and tennis courts and walking
So
trails.
we are not on
It's
that
not a
item right now.
rural area.
This is
No, it
public
is.
comment on
It is
this
rural.
item.
Okay.
It's
so
huge.
I'm just curious. It seemed weird. The interaction with you, with him, and the way he left seemed odd. So
So, if you attend the meeting on either Thursday or Friday, those would be good topics to bring up at those meetings.
okay, thank you.
And can I get your name, please? For the record?
Stephen Miller.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for your service. I know it's kind of difficult to be up there at times. My question is also with regard to something that happened at Skip Mesa, but it was a while back. And I dealt with the city about it because they made all kinds of variances with the last contractor that had Skip Mesa and took over. A couple things were they weren't supposed to have any of the high Danish, the high peak roofs that are like 30, I think they're 30 feet or something like that, but they're still 1 stories. They weren't supposed to be anywhere around the perimeter. So like if you're looking at from above, Hans Christian Park goes all the way up to Chalk Hill. They weren't supposed to be anywhere near within either side of the block, and they put them up anyway. So I had a discussion with the city about that, and it was too late. They also put all the fill dirt on the 3rd phase, and they subsequently raised all the foundations by 8 to 10 feet. And so I don't know if those people know it or not, but they bought those homes and they're sitting on fill dirt. They're not packed dirt. So that was an issue. And then the biggest issue I have right now with how funky things are going on there politically is on Valley View, which is if you're going up Chalk Hill and you get to the yield stop sign, the first, I think, 4 houses on Valley View that are along Chalk Hill, they have an open area, but it's all fenced off with 3 rail posts. And that was supposed to be all a public access open area for public use when they first came out with that manual, which you guys have somewhere in the city. And then that last phase contractor somehow changed it where that property was going to be part of their private property on those 4 or 5 particular houses, so they changed it and then they fenced it off. But it's weird because the city, even though they're paying property tax, apparently, those people for all that property that they have that goes all the way to Chalk Hill, the city and the city taxpayers are paying for and have paid for all the landscaping on that private property for those 5 structures, those 5 homeowners. I don't get it. I've never seen, that seems to me like a conflict of interest and a really weird thing. It's already weird to me that the city of Solvang is paying a landscaping company to do the public access area between the street and the sidewalk, where they don't do that anywhere else in town. So that seems weird, but what seems really weird is that the city is paying for, taxpayers are paying for landscaping on those 5 homes on Valley View that go all the way up to Chalk Hill, and there's no public access. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix too to the attorney, because I don't know if she knows about that, but Skip Mesa, it's a ball of wax for the city, and it has been since that last phase started. First phase was fine, but then whoever was on the planning commission or was the planning commissioner for the city after that totally threw everything up in the air and messed it up. So I just wanted to let you know that seems really odd to me and a conflict of interest, that's private property, but the taxpayers are paying for their landscaping in their backyard. It goes all the way to Chalk Hill. So thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Yeah, Hank, just for your benefit, I'll
Okay.
So this is a real important issue. Well, first of all, I think most people agree that landscape maintenance district, we probably have learned now it's not really the best idea. Homeowners association is much better, easier, cleaner, simpler. gives the residents control of their neighborhood and all that. So landscape maintenance district was a mistake. I had nothing to do with that, and I don't think any of you did either. So, but the taxpayers are not paying one dime for the landscape maintenance work that's being done in Skip Mesa. The 169 homes or parcels, there's one vacant lot still. The 169 parcels, each property owner is assessed on their tax bill annually. We just went through a two-step process with public hearings before the city council to establish the assessment for next calendar year, 2022. And the assessment is $1,296. So for next year. This current year they paid $1,272. That assessment went up a little bit. So next year on their tax bill, every one of those 169 properties will have an additional charge on their tax bill of $1,296. And that money is collected by the county tax assessor. It's forwarded to the city. It goes into a special fund for the Skip Mesa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District, and the city staff administer that with a few different contracts, one with Bright View Landscape Maintenance. So just to clarify, I didn't want anybody to go home tonight or to be listening at home and think that their tax money is paying for stuff at Skip Mesa. It's not. They're paying, and all the improvements that were done on those properties that border Valley View and Chalk Hill Road there, the open area in the back that Mr. Hamburg was referring to, they paid for all that. The maintenance district paid for all that, not the rest of the city. So just want to make that clear.
So the bottom line is all the landscape maintenance, it comes from taxes of the residents in Skip Mesa, not from any other taxes, right?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the public? Anybody online?
I have one hand raised. Kristen Kellner, please go ahead.
Hello, my name's Kristen Kellner. I'm a Skip Mesa homeowner, and I just wanted to share my thoughts regarding the Planning Commission's recommendations that I am in agreement with the majority of the recommendations made today by the Planning Commission, including not policing painting of the houses. Hearing that one resident speak was a little bit frustrating. I felt very frustrated for him to have received approval to move on with his painting and then having to stop when it's not even something regulated by city ordinance. I do feel strongly that any violations of city ordinance should be carried out. For example, specifically with the sheds, those exceeding 12 feet in height. And I had some concerns regarding the survey for homeowners association. I don't know if I don't have anything against the survey, but it would concerns me that it could delay remedying some of these situations that are in fact violations of city ordinance. I would hate to have to wait longer to have resolution on some of these issues, particularly the shed that stands at 16 feet tall as stated in the presentation. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Sherry Noble. Please go ahead. Sherry, please unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all this great information. I love, I'm one of the original owners in phase 2. I did have to have my house repainted because the original paint was not covering the house. And I did go through the city and they said, I'm a ranch style, you've got to have gray, paint on your stucco and, navy bean on your shutters and a red door, and it was done. And so I just followed what was in the design manual. I have documents, I could turn on my camera that have the recorded date on the vistas at Skeet Mesa, and it's recorded November 2012. And so, that's what I'm going off of. And so I want to be a good neighbor. I want to maintain the values of our home and keep our beautiful space. But at the same time, I don't know why the rules change from one phase to another. And that's what's concerning. Should we just throw them out and not have any? We are paying, originally we knew when we bought the house, we'd be taxed and it would go up every year, a certain amount to cover the costs. And that included the city staff to oversee the enforcement. I agree some of the petty things are, unfortunately, a drain on the administration. However, I do want to bring up that with COVID, I don't think there's any original other than Matt, bless his heart, who's still in the planning department. And so there was no one to call, there was no one to enforce. And it kind of was, if you're going on a walk, well, who are you going to call? There's no one there. And, Matt works incredibly hard. We don't want to call Matt with paint colors, but, it is a concern. What do we do? Who do we go to? Do we just throw out those original things that are, signed and dated? My initials are all throughout this. My home is my investment. It's my retirement. It's not just, I'm picky about a certain thing, that is maybe in someone's yard. But it is, what do we do and how do we do it right? I call the city, I'm a rule follower. And so, people can laugh at me for that, but I need something to follow that is going to guide my practices as a responsible homeowner and my neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Would anybody else on Zoom like to make a comment on this item? Or on phone? For phone, unmute yourself by using *6. Seeing no more public comment.
Okay. With that, we'll move it back to the commission and for discussion. So maybe we can just go through these and because these are.
I'm sorry, can you hear me on the phone?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment, if it's okay. I can't get off mute.
Yes, and can you state your name?
Yeah, my name's Pat Kelly. I'm a resident at Skeet Mesa. And I just want to be clear, when everyone moved in, we all signed CC&Rs. Every single person signed them. It's a 30-page document. And in general, people are not adhering to the CC&Rs. And I feel the city, with your recommendations, is washing your hands of it. Now, the CC&Rs were approved at City Council or by the Planning Commission in 2012. So I struggle that you're recommending we deal with the paint colors. Someone could come in and paint it purple, and what can you say? And then the RV issue, this is starting to look like Flying Flags RV park. So, how many RVs is enough? And the 8-foot rule that was put in the CC&Rs was so that Class A, B, and C RVs could not be parked there. In addition to that, people are going over the easement that the city owns, and there's no parking, there's no apron to drive up it. So how are they even allowed to do that? You guys are talking about putting a second concrete in, but that's not allowable. How are they allowed to drive over the yard? So anyhow, it's just an eyesore, and it's every single day I look more and more, we're just going to be a Bulletin Flying Flags RV park. So I struggle with that. These are $1 million homes. As Sherry mentioned, it's going to reduce the property value. And just want you to consider that and don't throw the CC&Rs out. Do what you guys said you were going to do in 2012 and help enforce them. And if you need to take money out of the general fund that we're providing, $1,296 a year, you should do so and staff up to it and enforce it. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else before we?
Would anybody else like to make a comment at this point on this item? Please unmute yourself.
There were no CC&Rs. There were no CC&Rs when I moved in at 2.
Would you like to step up again, if that's okay?
I moved in the first phase, which is Curtis Holmes. You went bankrupt after the first phase, and the second phase was taken over by another contractor. Now, apparently, according to this last gentleman, there were some documents they signed in 2012, but I moved in 2007, and I can honestly say that there is absolutely no reference to any kind of regulation of any kind about painting or any of these things that we're talking about. That if that happened, it happened 5 years after I moved in there, and I would be willing to bet that the people who moved in the first phase didn't have this experience to sign any kind of a CC&R. Perhaps the new contractor did, and so that's why there's a discrepancy. But I was absolutely not aware of any control or regulation of any kind. And obviously, I would have complied with those regulations if I'd have had them. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more raised hands now. Greg Milliken on Zoom. Please unmute yourself.
Sure, I think I'm unmuted. There we are. I'm a Skeet Mesa resident, and I just want to make a comment to note the distinction between the LLMD, which is the thing that Matt talked about that's funded by the assessments on the parcels, which is the landscape lighting and maintenance district on the one hand, and the CC&Rs on the other hand, which, as the Planning Commission knows and everyone here knows, have to do with how we maintain the properties, et cetera. So whatever the costs are or may come to be related to the CC&Rs and the enforcement of the CC&Rs doesn't have any connection actually with the LLMD. That would have to be something separate. At least that's my understanding. So I just wanted to highlight that distinction and do look forward also to finding out what the city attorney's review shows about the feasibility by whatever means of adding an HOA, kind of back in retrofitting an HOA into the district. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no more public comment at this point.
Okay, so, Scott, you had some comments you started to make, and I stopped you. Now would be the time.
It was just about the individual situation that we discussed, but if we're discussing the broader picture, maybe that's not the appropriate time to talk about it.
Yeah, we're not here to make a decision on whether he can paint his
Sure,
house or not.
correct, correct.
On the overall rules and regulations. I have a question about the CC&Rs. I was very confused in reading through this. It seemed like there were 3 sets of CC&Rs. And I didn't have time to go and compare each with the other to see what the differences are. And it appeared like with every phase, there was a different set of CCRs. If you look at the design manual, it specifically references the first set, but none of the others.
Correct.
So the design manual is tied to the first set of CCRs from 2004 or 3 or whenever it was.
Yeah.
But the other sets don't apply to the design manual.
So yes, there is a lot of documentation for this project. The original conditions of approval were from 2004 and 5. That was the guiding principles from the City Council and the Planning Commission at that time. There were some amendments done in 2011, as noted by one of the speakers, some changes in how they could build their houses or some of the design issues. The CCNRs, what we can determine is that there's two sets of CCNRs. The Curtis Homes CCNRs, and then the Vista at Skeet Mesa CCNRs. And as each one of the phases was built, 2, 3, and 4, they were annexed into the Vista at Skeet Mesa CCNRs. The design manual was approved in 2004 by the BAR at that time, and it was incorporated as the guiding document for all of Skeet Mesa. So you have different, things happening throughout the life of this project, but it's pretty much the distinction of the original Skeet Mesa subdivision, which was the whole 169 lots, and then first phase with Curtis Homes. There was a cooling off period during the recession, and then coastal community builders came in and finished the project and recorded the first Vista at Skeet Mesa CCNRs, and then annexed in phase 3 and 4 into those documents. Comparing the two, I think most of the changes between the first set of CCNRs and the second set was more guided by state law changes, and they did eliminate some of the items. I tried to compare them. It's sometimes hard to do. And, but overall, the requirements for what the CCNRs would handle, or ultimately an HOA or the city would handle, are pretty much the same in those two different sets of CCNRs.
Okay, and one thing that appears to be consistent is that there's no clear definition of who enforces them. It seems to say the city can if they want to, or the homeowners can if they want to, but there's nothing that says they have to be enforced.
It's really clear that the developer had a guiding role in implementing and managing the CCNRs while they were engaged in this project. And as they faded out in 2017-18 timeframe, as the project was finishing up, it says two things. The city has the right but not the obligation to enforce the CCNRs, and the homeowners have the right but not the obligation to enforce the CCNRs. That leaves sort of everybody trying to decide how to proceed with this, and that's why we're here today.
And I would also add, commissioners, that the CCNRs also provide that owners are required to obtain planning commission approval for improvements, and that includes things like sheds or painting your house, the way improvements is defined. So that's a little different than an enforcement role, because it's brought forward by the owner, but that is another process that's also outlined that has the city playing a more active role. And similarly, the DRC has a kind of design consistency review role that's outlined, where owners are supposed to bring their projects to the DRC for consistency approval. Again, separate from an enforcement action by the city, but still you can see how the CCNRs are expecting the city to be involved in those processes.
Comments? I think, I'm pretty sure I was on the BAR way back then when we approved it, and the key was in the early 2003 or 4 or 5, whenever that was that it was going to be, we looked at streetscape, and we had an opportunity, given that there was going to be 180 homes or something, to really do a great plan up there. And of course, Curtis Homes was willing to do anything that the city wanted. They weren't desperate, but they wanted to get the development done. The Skeet family had sold it, and so they were moving forward. And we had specific guidelines as to homes that are on the view corridor coming into town. They had to be Northern European with the steeper roofs, so that as people came in, you wouldn't see Spanish homes, even though you could have Spanish homes on the interior of the development. Nobody anticipated at the time that Curtis Homes wasn't going to follow through and continue. Well, times changed. The design guidelines took months, if not a year, to come up with. Everybody agreed to it, including the developer, city staff, planning commission, and ultimately city council. And the development moved ahead. And it was our last big project that the city was going to be able to really undertake unless we annex property, and that was not going to happen. The city looked at it from an economic standpoint that we want these homes to be done because it was going to bring in a population, it was going to bring in, maybe it was going to take more schooling, it was going to bring vitalization to town, and it was zoned for it, and it was the right thing to do. Developers gave a lot of things up with open space. The Skeet family had given Hans Christiansen Park to the city way back when. So it was a really private-public partnership development. I don't know why an HOA wasn't established at that time. I don't know if this landscaping maintenance program was something that we thought would be an easier thing for the city to administer because they are public streets, public sidewalks. And why we had a set of CC&Rs that didn't have an HOA to enforce it, it doesn't make a lot of sense looking back on it. Phase 2, it went away, and I kind of recall not being involved that much. When the second developer took it over, the city was pretty much desperate to kind of get it done. Let's get this going. And I remember them changing square footages. They said the market doesn't dictate to have these large homes. Let's let them have smaller homes. Let's move it around. The streetscape was still an important aspect of it, but it wasn't as important as it was because we'd come through this awful, terrible economic time with real estate. That doesn't answer any questions. I'm trying to lay the groundwork that it's hard for us to make a decision up here given this history. I'm a believer that when you buy a home and you have a set of CC&Rs that are recorded, I'm assuming these sets of CC&Rs are recorded on the deed of the homes, much like in any other CC&Rs. It's a recorded document or it doesn't have the enforcement. I can't imagine that there's two separate CC&Rs, but there could be. Phase 1 could have had an A, and Phase 2 could have had a B set of CC&Rs. It's difficult to read through this from Thursday until today and try to get 25 years of history out there and try to understand what's going on. But I'm giving my overall picture is that you buy a home, you have a set of CC&Rs, you expect that those things are going to be followed. When they're not followed, you want to enforce it. Whether it's through the city enforcement, because that's where it finally falls through, or through an HOA. In this case, it's the city, because there's no HOA. One of the speakers spoke about, well, you know what, the city took it on, raise the dang money and do it right, because we took it on. We have an obligation to 180 some homes up there that we need to do it right by them. We can't just wash our hands and say, wow, things have changed and this is tough. We don't have money because COVID came. I can tell you, again, in a general sense, not being political at all, but a lot of the dismantling of what took place in the planning department, no criticism to anybody, took place under our last administration that dismantled a lot of our city government, as some of the speakers spoke. That comes from enforcements of sign ordinances in town and building ordinances and windows that got put in commercial buildings. And in addition to that, obviously, Skeet Mesa fell into that, and there was difficult to get answers, difficult to get colors approved with limited staff that we have. With a Board of Architecture review going through a branding committee to a design review committee, do they have power, do they not? Is the membership city, is it valley-wide? What does that mean? It has been an absolute tough couple years. That doesn't do any good to tell the folks at Skeet Mesa this. That doesn't excuse anything. It just means that that's what happened. I don't blame it on one individual persons or people or government. It happened. We need to solve it. And we've got the responsibility, and the ultimate responsibility is the city of Solvang to solve this. And if it costs more money, I guess we're going to have to solve it. And if that takes more staff to sit and go through this, then that's what we need to do. Until and if an HOA or another governing body would take over that role, which then the neighbors would have more control over by an elected board and a commission, and they would make their decisions if they could ever get together up there and figure that out. Until then, we have to say time out. We have to say stop. We cannot allow more folks to violate the CCNRs without repercussions. And that includes RVs, and that includes the sheds that are not placed where they're supposed to, that are too high. It includes RVs that are over the 8-foot height, because that's what the CCNRs say. It includes the fencing that gets moved out to the street and is moved into a public easement, not even their private property. It needs to stop. My opinion. Now, those are the easy ones. You can't let an RV drive across a public sidewalk. If they can get an RV that's under 8 feet and drive through a fence that's screened at 6 feet, and it can go up their driveway and get into their side, so be it. If they have to go across a public easement without an encroachment permit, which we've heard that Matt's not going to allow, then they can't do it. If you put up a tough shed that's more than 12 feet in height and more than 120 feet, you can't do it. If you have it, you should move it. You violated the rules. Nobody can say that they didn't know the rules, because all they got to do, unless they weren't recorded, is pull up your title report and it would be there. You can also get them from the city. When I get into a little bit of problems, because those to me are the easy ones, the RV and the accessible and the ADUs, that's easy. Where it gets, and it's also easy when we get into, we're going to change out windows. No one brought up the fact that somebody might retro out windows, change out doors from a solid door to a glass door, change out windows from cut up because it was a country style to clear glass. They need permits for those. I would assume that would again have to come to city and would have to get changed. If they did in addition to their building, to their house, they would have to get a building permit, and that would have to go through city. Those are, to me, black and white. Changing landscaping, I'm not too concerned about. I think that things have changed. Landscaping is not as permanent as these other items are, and that as we become more drought tolerant, you can see it in phase 2 and phase 3. We've recognized that fact. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with somebody putting in the fake grass to save on water and do it that way. I have a problem with them cutting out trees that are in the public right-of-way and in the easement. You can't go do that. You're not supposed to go do that. And there should be some repercussions for it. I have, and now we get to the colors of the buildings. We have that discussion in the city of Solvang more than the folks in Skeet Mesa, unless you're involved in the city of Solvang. No, and one building and one color is somebody's wonderful color and one is not. That's a difficult one for me to make a subjective decision. I have argued time and time again, we need a Board of Architecture review that looks at colors, not a planning commission, and certainly not staff, because then staff gets thrown under the bus when they make the wrong subjective decision on the blue or the light blue or the dark blue. Therefore, you need an HOA or you need it to go to a BAR. We don't have a BAR, and we haven't been enforcing these colors up there. It sounds like from the gentleman who presented, other people have painted, and it was all complaint driven. And it seems absolutely unfair. He also had made the statement in his CCNRs, it doesn't say anything about colors. I don't know if that's true or not. I believe he believes it's true, but it would be an easy thing to find that out. So full circle, I don't know if I have enough information tonight to make a lot of decisions on where we should go, other than I think that my direction to city council is the city staff needs to enforce what we've done. We agreed to it, we signed off on it, and it didn't just happen, it happened over decades. The individual cases of this gentleman who wants to get his house painted should be able to appeal that decision to staff, and just like we can't appeal a BAR to a planning commission on a color change, be able to appeal it to the planning commission on a color change, even though technically it might not state that somewhere. There has to be an appeals committee somewhere that's got to make that tough decision for this gentleman and any other neighbors in general. So I think that some of these things which are codified in the city are really easy to do, meaning the RVs, the sheds, the accessory dwelling units, the fencing that encroaches, the driveways, those are simple. And if it's more restrictive up there and it's 8 foot of RVs, it's 8 foot of RVs. And anybody, we need to have empathy toward our neighbors, that everybody bought into a neighborhood or into a city, and we all bought into it, wanting it, and then you violate it to your advantage, but to the detriment of your neighbor. It's just not right. Or the neighbors, all that Skeet Mesa neighbors, all the owners need to get together. They need to petition the city to throw away the HOA, the CCNRs, get them taken off your title report, and never form an HOA, and it would be just like any other great neighborhood in the valley in Solvang. You don't have to have these CCNRs and HOAs, but we have them now, and I think they need to be enforced. And that would be my recommendation to City Council. Enforce what we can enforce, and then take a hard look at those subjective decisions on the landscaping and on the colors of houses. Done.
Joni, do you have any thoughts?
I agree pretty much with everything that Aaron said. My advice to the people at Skip Mesa is to create a homeowners association. I think then you would control your destiny. Right now, you don't. Even though you signed off on CCNRs and you don't understand what they said, or you didn't sign off on them, who knows? It's a quagmire. It's a tough decision for us up here to determine what we can tell this gentleman to do. I know it's not on the agenda, but eventually how he is going to manage the painting of his house. He's spent $10,000 so far. He has another 6 or 7 to go. That's unfortunate that he was given the wrong advice. Very unfortunate.
Scott, any thoughts?
I'm in agreement with both of my staff here. Like I mentioned earlier, from the very beginning, an HOA, in my opinion, would be a big benefit, and a lot of these questions wouldn't be questions. But like Commissioner Peterson said, until that happens, the homeowners up there are depending on us, depending on the CCRs that they agreed to and signed when they first moved in, to provide protection to the rules. So we should all follow the rules.
I would generally agree. As I indicated much earlier, I think the real solution is for the residents up there to form an HOA and be masters of their own fate and not depend on us to make decisions for them, which some are going to like and some aren't going to like. And enforcement is a problem I've had for as long as I've been on the Planning Commission. Nothing gets enforced. I mean, we make rules and regulations, and they're just ignored. Or some people abide by them and say, yeah, we should do it, and other people don't, and there's no repercussions. In every case, there's always an appeals process. Where, if the BAR says something, they can come here or go to the city council. But we can obviously easily enforce the city zoning ordinances and what have you. But, if we agreed, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, that we were going to take this on, then we should do it. And at the same time, if it's something we don't want to do or can't afford to do, find a way to remove the CCRs or form an HOA or find additional funding sources to pay for the enforcement that we need to do. That's my feeling.
And just last comment, it could be that, we're just recommending to City Council. City Council may look at this and throw it out and say, you know what, we're not going to enforce any rules up there at all. No more rules than we enforce in the city of Santa Barbara and other places. That's their prerogative. I just don't feel comfortable, and I think that we all feel pretty strongly that we're not willing to just throw it out and say to heck with it, and those folks that are up there that are relying upon us to enforce the regulations don't have us on their side to do what we can do. And again, I I applaud Matt with the RVs and the driving on the streets, and you have to go in the driveway, and there's a way to do it. The 8-foot rule needs to be enforced. Otherwise, it's hooey. I mean, I know for a fact over in Village Collection, I've had friends that had RVs that were too tall, and they had to actually dig down and put the cement in. And nobody wants to go rent a spot for an RV, but you bought a spot that has RV restrictions. There are restrictions. We all believe in freedom of your property to do what you want, but it's not true. We all have obligations to follow the rules and the guidelines that are there. And when you have CC&Rs that you have recorded against your property, you got to follow them. Or like you said, Jack, it's for nothing. We have these rules and there's no enforcement, and you can't rely on it. And that's just, it's not how it's supposed to be. Change it if you want to, but right now we need to follow through on what we're obligated to do.
What do you recommend that I do? Wait another 6 months? Do I have to just repaint according to some particular approved color scheme, or I don't really know what to do? And I'm really in a dilemma. I can understand if I'd have been notified when I started to paint the house, but I'm over 60% painted, and it's been sitting there for over 2 months.
Can I ask a general question? If somebody, not this gentleman, because I don't want to speak specifically to your case, sir, I just out of due respect, but in general, somebody wanted to paint a house tomorrow, they would need to come to city staff and get approval.
Yes, based on the procedures that were set up prior to my being here.
And the procedures are,
I would look at take the application, have a color palette presented, and compare them to the exhibits that I provided in the presentation, and see if they're consistent with those. If not, then we would take it to the DRC.
But he did come to you, and you did give him
Met with her
approval.
3 times, and she did approve it.
Yes, because at that point, that process hadn't been explained to me. And so, yes, they were read through part of the design guidelines, and it said diversity is encouraged, and that was one of the provisions. So in this case, the decision, we'll need to decide whether we move forward to the DRC and bring it to you. If the neighbors continue to have an issue, there's the appeal process to go through.
so again, anyone who's painting a house or wanting to build anything on their property to change a windows, anything of the design nature comes to staff. Staff makes a ruling. If the applicant or somebody appeals it, it goes to the design review committee. After that, it could be appealed to the planning commission.
And then to the city council.
And to city council. And so anybody who was doing that would be the course of action that they should take. And, okay.
And it may be the situation with some of the other things that you've discussed, people may want to appeal and go through that process.
Remember, there's at least a half a dozen homes up in there that have been painted not according to the guidelines. Isn't there some way I could be given an exception to go ahead and finish painting and not have it be an issue?
I think I would just.
That there is, but we can't do that.
I think, yes, this is not an item on the agenda, so I would just suggest that we meet with you individually after we receive this general direction from the Planning Commission, and we'll figure out a way to get your keys.
If I could make a suggestion, if the next step is for the planning commission to give staff direction and it's going to go to the city council, then just add one more item on the list to make a determination on this gentleman's property.
Well, this is not on the agenda for tonight's meeting, so we cannot add it to the agenda for Planning Commission to discuss this. Based on what the Planning Commission tells us today, we'll make a determination on what we need to bring to the city council as the next step.
Okay, we'll talk.
Talk.
Yes.
And I'd also just like to remind the commission that the public comment period was closed on this matter. So if there is going to be further back and forth on the issues on the agenda, we'd have to reopen the public comment period.
Thank you. I just don't know what to do. I'm really between a rock and a hard
We'll be in touch with you tomorrow about that.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
You have direction, you get the sense of what we.
I think we need a motion to send out a recommendation to the city council.
Yeah, and if I may at this point, the motion, we can send the recommendations in writing, and because there isn't a resolution drafted explaining your recommendations, we weren't sure, where you all were going to come down today. That can be accomplished by just making a motion to forward the minutes to the city council so they can see your recommendations that were discussed this evening.
I think that's probably a very good idea. So,
And I think that how staff laid it out with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, meaning the accessory dwellings, made it really clear as to what the 5 or 6 issues are. So I think that's a great way to outline that, your minutes.
Okay, that'll work. So is that, would you like to make that motion?
She wants a motion.
I will move that the minutes from our session regarding Skeet Mesa, dealing with the 5 and the added 6th issue, gets forwarded to City Council with the general recommendation that is on the City of Solvang to enforce the CCNRs until they make a change or the homeowner association makes a change. Comes into existence. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I would add that we recommend that possibly that Skeet Mesa investigate creating a homeowners association.
Yes.
And that we forward that to the city council, and the city council maybe will make that same recommendation.
Amend my motion. I agree.
Okay, is there a second?
I second that.
Thank you.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0. Thank you.
One absent. Okay, so moving on, planning staff comments.
At this time, we're not sure about a meeting for next month. We are working on a couple of things, but I don't know if they'll be ready or not. So please hold that date, but I will let you know as we get about another week through if we'll have items for next agenda.
I'll just make one more comment that the city council did authorize refunding or bringing back an assistant planner position. So we're in process of filling that position. So hopefully next time you see us, there will be another planning staff.
Did I also hear that there's a code enforcement gentleman, perhaps?
There is a code enforcement gentleman. It's a little bit of a pilot program right now. He works directly with me. It's our retired chief of police, Eddie Stewart. So he has been retained as a contractor, and we're really just looking at what works in our code enforcement, what are the needs, and what he'll make some recommendations for code enforcement going forward. So I think some of the issues that we're looking at is, how reactive we are versus proactive, and what will really work best to ensure that we are equally enforcing all of our regulations.
Any other comments?
No other comments from me?
No?
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think he's going to be very busy.
Night, Matt. Thank you.
Good night, thank you.